As preparation for your exam, your mock exam, and or preparation for the PsyB1 exam, here's a video on the psychodynamic approach. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through first of all the key assumptions, the key differences, okay, the key areas that are different to other approaches. If you want, it's probably advisable for you to get a big piece of paper or a couple of pieces of paper. I'm going to talk through these, but you're going to add in extra detail. Okay, so these are the key bits to discuss, or to pick a couple of these if you have an essay question. All right, so, and perhaps I'll talk about that at the end, a little bit of a structure. But, so the first thing are the key assumptions. What do we mean by assumptions? These are the key features, really, that make up the psychodynamic approach. In other words, how they are different to the behaviourist or SLT or humanist, etc. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is the dynamic unconscious. You can refer to it also as an unconscious determinism. All right, so what does that mean? Let's add some things in here. So dynamic unconscious, it means that the id does not disappear. The id is in your unconscious and it continues to affect your behaviour. So hence the reason why we've got this unconscious determinism that Freud refers to. Okay, an unconscious determinism as opposed to a biological or an environmental one of the others. So again, you could always bring in the alternatives straight away on that. For example, we know this, for example, the work you've been doing with phobias. The id impulses punished in childhood are repressed into the unconscious, but they carry on affecting us. How? Because they're displaced, Freud says, they're displaced onto other things to produce a phobia, okay, of that particular thing. So if I just, let's put that in as an example that you might want to use. Okay, let's pop that in there. All right. So in other words, dynamic unconscious, being applied to a specific topic. Here we've got the topic of phobias. Here we're using some key terms. The id, impulse, punished in childhood, are repressed. There's that word repressed. We know what that means. Okay, so that's something, be careful, some of you are using different words. Into the unconscious again, be careful what you're using. It is unconscious in Freud's term, using Freud's terminology. And there they are displaced onto something else. And as you know already, that could be that they're displaced onto something specific, so a specific phobia, or a social phobia as well. Okay, so the dynamic unconscious is about these this id still affecting our behaviour. So, unfortunately, the id at a conscious level would be very harmful. So we know that we can see the id at work, but we have to see it indirectly. How do we do that? Well, you guys have already studied this. We know a little bit about it. We're going to put them in here. Examples being defense mechanisms, dreams, Freudian slips, and so on. Let's just talk about those. So let's look at these defense mechanisms first of all. What are these? Make sure you can define these. What are they? See if you can just do that for a minute. Pause for a moment and see what you think. Okay, so you should have down something like this. They're unconscious mechanisms. Unconscious mechanisms to protect the conscious mind from the id. Okay, we could even say unconscious coping mechanisms, that's better. Unconscious coping mechanisms to protect the conscious mind from the id. Examples of it. Again, just pause, but you should be able to come up with at least 3. Okay, so let's write some in here. Okay, so hopefully you managed to get those. Displacement, what is it? Remember, displacement is where you put the energy from the id onto another more acceptable target, a safe target. So all the id impulses that are aggressive, things like anger, etc. Instead of taking it out on a target that would cause you difficulty, would mean that you'd get punished or something like that, you take it out onto a safe target. So often what happens is you take it out on a member of the family or something like that. Reaction formation, remember, is doing the opposite, feeling the opposite emotions supposedly of what you are feeling, or acting out in an opposite way to the emotions you're feeling. So for example, if you really like someone, you might be really nasty to them. If you are Freud would say that if you really hate somebody, you might be really nice to them. So it's the opposite emotion really is expressed. Repression, you know what repression is? It's where the unconscious, where unhappy things, things that you don't want to remember, things that are too painful, are pushed down into the unconscious. That's repression. And then regression is where you go to a safer age, really, an age where you are happier. So if there's really stressful times, you might regress to a previous stage of your life, for example. You might, and then it demonstrates itself, for example, by you sucking your thumb or curling up into fetal position, something like that. And sublimation as well as acceptable forms of releasing that tension. Okay, so we've got various different defense mechanisms. Be able to quote the definition or define it, and then give a couple of examples. There are other ways that this dynamic can show itself, as you know. We also have things we've mentioned here. What else have we got? So the Freudian slips, okay, that you could put on there as well as another example. Sorry, here we are, Freudian slips. And what are these? These are slips of the tongue. So instead of saying, your stomach looks flat today, you might say to somebody, your stomach looks fat. Okay, it's supposed to be the unconscious slipping past the ego and the superego. The other way, dreams, remember those words: latent content and manifest content. Okay, so the latent content is the hidden meaning. The manifest content is the way it manifests itself, the way it shows itself. So how the dream shows itself to you. Right. And Freud again would say that was important. That's demonstrating, it's showing us the id coming out in some way. Okay, so those give you some ideas. Right, let's have a look then. The second one we want to look at, the second key assumption, is the importance of childhood. Right. As you know, Freud was the first one to say that childhood is really key to who we become as an adult. With this, he was talking specifically about these psychosexual stages. So let's pop that in. There are a couple more, but in fact, these are the ones we really touch on. And to be honest, it's really the phallic stage that we need to know about, okay, because that's pretty crucial for us. So what do we need to know about this? Right, you need to know that they occur at a particular age, and let's put this on as an example for you. Let's put in some information, okay? So they occur at a particular stage or a particular age, all right, as you know, of a child's development. And it's all about this libido. The libido is an energy force that we're born with. It's kind of makes up id. And libido is focused around a particular erogenous zone. All right, for example, if it's the oral stage, then it's going to be the mouth, etc., etc. Right, so a particular erogenous zone of the body. And Freud believes that we get over or understimulated at a particular stage. And what then will happen is, because of that, and this is the key word you want, we get fixated. We get fixated at that stage. And what that means is this will determine our adult personality. Really important we know that. Okay, so we're saying psychosexual stages, focus libido energy. Let's put libido energy. Let's do that, highlight that a little bit for you so you know you need to include that. Libido energy is focused around a particular erogenous zone. That's important as well. All right, just saying that. You don't really need to go into all the different ones. But Freud then says we get fixated. You can include under or overstimulated. You can always ask me about a bit more about that. But the key thing is that we get fixated at that stage, and that then determines our adult personality. Okay, so that's important. So you can see why the psychosexual stages are important. Key to this, we must talk about the phallic stage. Why is that so crucial? Why is that the one we talk about all the time? Well, that's where supposedly Oedipus and Electra occur. Okay, and obviously it's through Oedipus and Electra that we learn our gender and our morals. So which words do we need for this? Okay, let me just jot these down and then I'll talk you through it. Okay, so key things we need to know. Phallic stage, roughly about 3 to 5 or 6 years. Okay, different texts you'll see different things, but it's the earliest is at about 3. Be guided by that. Sometimes they'll put you a little sort of trick question in about so and so. You know, Thomas is only 2 and he doesn't realise he's got to steal. He isn't. You know, he shouldn't steal the chocolate bar or whatever it is. Be guided by that. Thomas, if he's only 2, Freud would say he won't have gone through the phallic stage, therefore he won't understand about morals. Okay, so just be aware of something like that. Don't go just on the age, though. It's important you're looking at what they're telling you about it. Okay, but the age will hint at it. So Oedipus boys, you need to make sure you say that. Electra's for girls. Basically, the child is supposed to lust after the opposite sex parent. Therefore, with boys, they have castration anxiety. Let's make sure we just say that's for boys. And so basically what happens is they love their fathers, but they also fear them. They have conflict then, and to resolve that conflict, it's important you use these terms, they identify with the father. That's a defense mechanism, identification. Identify with the father, and what does that mean? It means they become a little version of father. They internalize the father's behaviors, their habits, their values, but also, really importantly, their gender and their morals. And that's where Freud believes we get gender and morals from. Okay, really important. And of course, at this stage, if you're writing an essay, you could then bring in criticisms of that. SLT, for example, think it happens through imitation, through observing role models and imitating them, etc., etc. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a moment. So Freud would also say then that the child does not know right from wrong before the age of 3, okay, because no morals have been developed. With girls, very similar. You can outline, you're going to be using the same terms. The only difference, girls obviously haven't, you know, they think they can't be castrated, and therefore Freud believes that they don't identify so strongly with their mothers, therefore they won't develop their morals as strongly. They'll always need external guidance, according to Freud. We've got issues like that. We've also got the fact that girls, he wasn't quite sure, he couldn't quite explain it for girls, but he thought that girls, their identification came from real conflict, loving their mums, but also fearing the loss of the mother's love. But again, most of the time they'll give you an opportunity to talk about Oedipus. Occasionally it's about Electra with the girls. Just make sure you've got a little bit of information about that. Okay, so importance of childhood. we need to, as we've said, it's important to talk about this libido energy, going through psychosexual stages, getting fixated, which determines your adult personality. I've got here, for example, anal retentive personality describes somebody who's very fussy and very meticulous, and also the different stages: oral stage, anal stage, and most importantly, phallic. To be honest, oral and anal we don't really cover. But I can always give you more information. So this is just a bit of revision, okay? So third point, let's have a look at our third point. Okay, so interaction of the mind, the third point. The id, the ego, and the superego. Remember, it's useful for you to talk about the dynamic interaction. That just means that they're interacting constantly, okay? Id is constantly demanding. Superego is, to be honest, constantly demanding you to be perfect. It's demanding what it wants, okay, instant gratification. And the ego somehow has to try and mediate, go between the two and get some sort of balance. So let's look at what we might need. If you're talking about the interaction of the mind, we're talking id, ego, superego. So you would need to say that id is the pleasure principle and it's always in the unconscious. What is it? Well, it's like this energy force, like we've said already. But it's the selfish bit. It's the really aggressive bit. It covers things like memories, unpleasant memories. It is really the driving force of your behaviour. The ego develops around about the first year, and that first couple of years, really, first 2 years, first year or two. Let's put it that. And it operates on something called the reality principle. And what does that mean? That just means that it's trying to allow the id to do what it wants, but only when it's safe to do so, okay, when it avoids danger. Superego, as you know, is the morality principle, all right, and superego, as we know, develops at the phallic stage. Whoops. Okay. So, what's this interaction? As we've already said, the id threatens to bubble into the conscious, so the ego has to keep it in the unconscious. It can't come up to the conscious. It's too harmful for us. All right. So the ego has to try and protect the mind. And how does it do that? With the defense mechanisms, as we've just said. All right. So one of the ways of doing that is defense mechanisms. It's not the only way. We've already talked about dreams, and up here we've talked about the other ways that we can see it: dreams and Freudian slips, etc., etc. Okay, so it depends on what you're discussing, but one of the ways that the id is allowed to show itself safely is through these defense mechanisms. Okay, and I've put here, make sure you can define these and give at least 2 examples, and then I've gone on to give an example there. Okay. And finally, another key assumption, the last key assumption we're going to look at, is the use of case studies, the subjective approach. Okay, so what does Freud do with this? Let's have a look at this. So, his use of case studies. Basically what he did was he tried to access the unconscious in different ways. So, for example, as you know, through free association, dream analysis, whatever. And that way, Freud, he believes that he can see what the root of the problem is, the cause of the problem, and then explain this to a patient. And that would allow the id to be released. Okay, so his idea is that he would just do talking therapies, really, and just see whether he could go into detail, interview patients and find out more about them. And obviously there are problems with this in comparison to scientific research. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. So those, these are his key assumptions, really. These are the basic ones, that we've got a dynamic or an unconscious determinism, dynamic unconscious. What do we mean by that? That it's still actively affecting our behaviour, and we've got examples of that there. Secondly, he was the first one to come up with the fact that childhood was so important. Why is childhood important? Well, apart from the fact that at childhood we will learn our gender and our morals through the psychosexual stages, he's saying that childhood will shape our personality, things like fixation. So with the importance of childhood, you've got various things you can talk about. One is the psychosexual stages and how they're important for our adult personality, and the other one is all to do with the phallic stage specifically, and where we learn gender and morals, etc. Okay. Third one is this interaction of the mind, the dynamic interaction of the mind. Talk about what the three areas are: the id, the ego, superego. What do they mean? These principles, okay, that we've talked about, and the interaction, the fact that the id is supposed to stay in the unconscious, but it threatens to bubble up into the conscious, and that's going to be very harmful for us. So the ego is given the task, and this is again where you could put in defense mechanisms, etc. And finally, key assumption is the use of case studies. Right, his approach is not scientific. It is specifically to use case studies and things like that. So let's evaluate it. Okay, let's have a look. We should really start with some positives. Let's have a look at the positives to begin with. It is always important to balance it out. We've got plenty of criticisms of Freud, but we want to balance it with some positives. So let's have a quick look at these. Pause this at any time. Okay, so first of all, psychoanalysis has helped tens of thousands, probably millions of people by now. Psychoanalysis has started talking therapies, and we know for a fact that that has helped a lot of people. Secondly, the case study technique, although we're going to look at the limitations of it, it does actually give us a better understanding of the causes of a problem. Okay, using qualitative measures, we can explore why. Why is somebody behaving in a certain way? Okay, and that's something you don't get from other scientific methods like experiments. Thirdly, Freud was the first to emphasize the importance of childhood, and now everybody obviously accepts that as a given, really. Everybody accepts that your childhood is going to shape you as an adult. And fourthly, Freud's idea of the unconscious, many people believe in that. All right, some things like defense mechanisms do seem logical. It seems likely that we do have something else at work that sometimes we can't directly control. Sometimes things pop out that you didn't really intend to say or whatever. Okay, and this idea of it coming from another area of your mind, the unconscious, seems to be a feasible idea. We would also need then to include negative points. Okay, so let's have a look at these negatives. Okay, the first one I've got down there. There are problems with his technique. Why? What's wrong with his technique? Well, we know he used case studies. All right, and what's great about that is we do get rich qualitative data. Okay, but the problem is it's subjective. It is subjective data, and what happens is that it's an interpretation. It's interpreted to fit his theory, and therefore it's completely unscientific. Science expects us to objectively test a theory. Right, so science expects us to objectively test a theory. And Freud doesn't do that. All right, he doesn't even lay down a theory. Okay, he doesn't make any sort of prediction for a theory. Okay, he just analyzes whatever the patient's told him, and that's then his opinion of what the cause is. So it's completely unscientific on every count, and but it's he doesn't even attempt really to be scientific, and obviously psychology is expected to meet the requirements of a science, and he doesn't do that, that's for sure. Okay, second one is problems with his sample. Who did he use? Well, you think about it, the cases you know about are people like Little Hans and the Rat Man. Okay, now he comes up with a whole theory of child development based on one child, and obviously again it's very unscientific. That's what we would call a limited sample. We can't then generalize to all children. Science expects a large representative sample and a cross-section of society, let's say of society here, and obviously Freud hasn't done that. Okay, Freud is using his patients, and they already have supposedly existing problems, Might not be the problem he says, but they do have existing hysteria or issues, phobias or something like that, which is why they're seeing him in the first place. So, you know, he is using a biased sample, biased ED, all right, biased sample. Okay, third problem is this concept of the unconscious. Obviously, because it's in the unconscious, as you know, you can't easily access it, to test it, and to verify it. If you don't do that, if you do attempt to do that, if you don't, let's just go back to that. If you don't do that, then obviously it's unscientific. If we don't test it using clear methodology, acceptable methodology to science, then it becomes unscientific. But if we do attempt to do that, critics will say it's unethical, because what it means is you bring it up to the conscious, potentially harmful thoughts, etc., and in order to inspect them. All right, and some people say, well, the reason they're in the unconscious is because they're too traumatic, they're too dangerous to be in the conscious. Okay, that's why they're in the unconscious. So there are real difficulties over this idea of consciousness and unconsciousness, I should say, unconsciousness, and how we go about inspecting that. Another problem, let's use this one, the problem with gender and moral development. Okay, so there's masses of stuff, as you know, but remember this would be in the approaches section, so it's not in the gender section. You've got more to develop for gender, but you can put in a problem here. There are various problems. For example, morality is not supposed to develop before the phallic stage, about 3 onwards, according to Freud. But people know that children at a very young age already have a sense of right and wrong. Oops, that's meant to say wrong. Okay, did that in a bit of a hurry. So morality and gender are only learned, according to Freud, through the same-sex parent, but others, like SLT, say we learn it through modelling from any role model. Right? And the behaviourist approach says that we can, anyone can shape good or bad behaviour from morality. Okay, so there's various different things that we can refer to there. And probably another key point here is the one that probably everybody, just about everybody has issues with, and that is this idea of childhood sexuality. Let's phrase it like that. So problems with the unconscious sexual desires of childhood that he refers to. He's saying that, at the phallic stage, a child it lusts after their opposite sex parent. Most of us find that is completely unacceptable, and some even go on to say that actually those sort of parts of his ideas, his theory that he's, his ideas for his approach are actually very harmful, because it kind of suggests that children encourage those unacceptable sexual advances, and most people say that's completely unacceptable. So there are quite a lot of issues with his approach, and we need to make sure we balance it, so we've got some positives but also the negatives. Okay, so how do you do an exam question on this? If it's a straightforward exam question, remember you've got 4 AO1s and you've got 6 AO2s you have to get. The AO1s are the descriptive fact. The AO2s are from analysing, right, evaluating. So all this evaluation, if it's a straightforward discuss Freud question, all of that is AO2. It's straightforward, saying there's a problem with this because, there's a problem with that because. One great thing about it is this. One really positive thing about it is that. Okay, and there's many other points we can make, positive and negatives, but this is a really good start. And this is all you need for your essay, for your revision for AS. So AO1s, AO2s. The only thing that the other things that you are more likely to get asked these days are comparisons. So asking you to compare SLT with Freud, psychodynamic and social learning theory. So of course, key things there, as we talked about in class. I think about the ages. SLT says that things like gender or any of the behaviours can be learnt from birth, just by observing role models. Freud will say things like gender and morals have to be learnt at the phallic stage. Okay, so we've got things like that that are key. Freud says our behaviour is driven by this unconscious id. SLT says no, it's not. It's all about observing role models.
Freud says the only role models you have really are your same-sex parent. SLT say no, that's not true. Anyone can be a role model, and it doesn't even have to be a human. Okay, kids will copy all sorts of different things, even cartoon characters. So there are some key things there, and then obviously if you're asked to discuss differences, the AO1s come from those comparisons. The AO1s come from those comparisons. So the AO1s are not just saying what Freud thinks and then what SLT thinks. You need to actually state clear comparison point. And then we can go on to apply that by giving examples, real life examples, and also evaluating the different approaches. Okay, so have a look at that, and we will try to look at some past exam questions, more past exam questions in preparation for your exam.